Okay, we started. Good morning to all the presents here at the webinar. Good afternoon, good evening to everyone who is following us from other countries right now. First of all, I would like to apologize for our delay to start this webinar. We had a few technical problems and connection problems. We have many speakers today who will speak from different countries. My name is Leonardo Pileggi. I belong to the group Maré de Ciências, or Science Tide, from Unifesp, and Bruno Takano is here. He's a sustainability manager from Santos Port Authority. Today, we start our second day of discussions in this international event, which is Dialogues of the Ocean Culture, which is for the first time happening in the Southern Hemisphere in the city of Santos. This event is organized by UNESCO, by the program Science Tide from Unifesp and Santos City Hall. The intention here is to discuss, communicate ocean culture to the many sectors of our society, public and private institutions, and the civil society as a whole. The event began today on December 10th of 2022, and it's a huge success. We have lots of audience following us and many parallel events happening. We count on the participation of more than 20 countries. People came to the city of Santos in person, and many others are following us virtually. Yesterday, we had more than 1,500 visualizations, and we counted on simultaneous translation. It could not be different. The port sector is representing this relationship with the ocean, and we are present in this discussion ecosystem. Yesterday, we started our dialogues with the Ocean Port Panel, where we had many different experiences, and Santos Port Authority has shown us many experiences. We counted on the presence of many authorities, regulating agencies, Santos City Hall, unions related to the sector, in the academic world. Up to where we know, this is the first direct actions that counts on the participation of the port sector, focusing on the sustainable development of the ocean. This was proclaimed by the UN. So we will continue our dialogue with further successful experiences that happened outside of Brazil. That's why we organized this webinar today. We will start with Mr. Joaquim Verheyen from Antwerp Port. He works as a consultant for the Antwerp Port, which is a subsidiary of the Antwerp Port Authority in Bruges. And he provides managing, consultancy, and training services for ports all over the world. Joaquin is experienced in project management, and he focuses on sustainability, engineering, renewable energy, and environmental management. In the Antwerp port, he works with environmental management and sustainability policies for the ports. Welcome, Joaquin.
Thank you very much. And thank you for the kind introduction. I believe I can start my presentation. Also from my side, apologies for the technical delay, but I'm very happy to be here to talk to you about the perspective of Port of Antwerp Bruges as a port authority on sustainability. Next slide, please. So I am working as a consultant today for Port of Antwerp Bruges International, who takes care of the consultancy and management services for port authorities worldwide. We are located in Antwerp, in the Port of Antwerp itself, as being an affiliate of the Antwerp Port Authority. Next slide, please. And before, I also worked for the Antwerp Authority itself. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. I will give you a small introduction first on Port of Antwerp Bruges as being the authorities for the port platforms in Antwerp and Bruges. Then I will explain you the sustainability policy of our authority, how we set it up by working with our people in the port. We developed a lot of partnerships, and I will give you a short case study of what we have done for a Brazilian port, being Porto do Açu. I will have some time for questions at the end of the presentation. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So as from April this year, there was a big shake in the Belgian port sector because the two major Belgian ports, being Antwerp and Bruges, have had a big merger and have combined to Port of Antwerp Bruges, combining to be a stronger network of two platforms under one umbrella. It is important to mention that, as you can see, the Antwerp port is located inland, so we are a river port. So the impact of the Antwerp port is on the ocean is a bit less. However, now with the merger with Zeebrugge, and Zeebrugge being a seaport, we are connected directly to the ocean. But the main part of my presentation will still focus on the Antwerp port platform, which is also by far the biggest one. The two ports are actually located right next to the cities of Antwerp and Bruges, the two major cities in Belgium. So the merger of these two ports in the heart of Europe was one of the biggest events in the European port sector of the last year. Next slide, please. Can I have the, yes, thank you. Here are some major figures on our port, being the second largest port in Europe, right next to Rotterdam, from our neighboring country in the Netherlands. We are the largest car handling port. We do a lot of export as well, a big throughput of almost 300 million tons a year. More than 20,000 seagoing ships per year, a big cruise terminal. Then very important, we are the largest chemical hub in Europe, next to Houston in America, so the second largest in the world. And 15% of the EU gas market also passes through our port. With the geopolitical situation of today, this is of course also a very important factor for our port. So just some small figures on our port. In the next presentation, I will talk to you more about our sustainability policy. Next slide, please. First, I will explain you how our policy was set up. And this we have done by using the most renowned framework for sustainable development in the world, which are, of course, the United Nations SDGs, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Next slide, please. We have used the SDGs because they are a common framework, a common language to talk about sustainability and to measure sustainability in organizations worldwide. As you can see, sustainability is embedded in the mission of our port authority, being home port as a lever for a sustainable future. And we have opted to set out our sustainability strategy focused around several priority SDGs. However, important to mention, we do efforts for all SDGs. We have action plan for all SDGs, but for the ones that you see here, we have set actions that are a lot stronger compared to the other ones, because we believe it's important to have a focus on several SDGs where we believe that we can have a bigger impact as being the Port of Antwerp Bruges. Next slide, please. The first one that we have prioritized is SDG number 3 on good health and well-being. We have more than 200,000 people in total working directly or indirectly in the port of Antwerp and Bruges. And we have set out a big program about well-being of all our employees, especially with the recent pandemic. We have had a lot of extra measures taking place to make sure that all employees adapted well to the new context of working abroad and working from home and in the office simultaneously. So I think the Port of Antwerp Bruges did a great job there in taking care of us. Next slide, please. So we have also selected SDG 8. This is a no-brainer, being the largest economical engine of the whole country of Belgium. The Port of Antwerp Bruges is taking care of sustainable growth. Why sustainable growth? Well, the Antwerp port is projected to be full in terms of container capacity in 2 or 3 years. So all of the terminals will be at their maximum capacity for container handling. And this is why we are now building a new tidal dock in our port, which will be the biggest tidal dock in Europe. But because we want to realize this growth in a time of climate change, for example, we think it's crucial that we make sure that this growth is sustainable growth. And therefore, we are already designing and deploying the world's top class low emission technologies to make sure that this new dock will be the greenest dock in all of Europe. Next slide, please. Concerning the next SDG that we have selected, SDG 9, on industry, innovation and infrastructure, I would like to focus on the part of innovation. Which is absolutely key for our policy because we have a lot of startups actually within the Antwerp platform, and to assist them to have a playground for their new technologies, we've actually opened up the full platform in Antwerp and Zeebrugge, where the startups or accelerators can test their new innovations, which can then be used for sustainable purposes. For example, here on the picture you see a drone, which has been tested in our port platform and which is now used by the Port Authority to detect oil spills as soon as possible. Next slide, please. Next SDG that we have selected is SDG 11 on sustainable cities and communities, which makes sense because we are the both platforms are located right next to a big city center, and therefore, if we want to keep growing, we must make sure that we keep living in harmony with our surroundings. We actually already have also have a lot of communities living inside the port area, and therefore, for example, we take actions like the device that you can see in the picture. This is a container. It's a plastic catcher that we use to catch plastic from the river Scheldt, on which the port of Antwerp is located, to make sure that all of these plastics don't enter the city of Antwerp. Next slide, please. And that will be on SDG number 13, which is on climate action, which is the one that we are known most for, because our CEO, Jacques van der Merwe, has set the very strong ambition of being climate neutral port in 2050. Reminding you of the fact that we have the second biggest chemical cluster in the world. This is, of course, a huge challenge, and therefore we have set out a lot of pioneering projects, which I will explain in the rest of the presentation. Next slide, please. Those 5 priority SDGs are also selected and supported by one extra SDG that we have prioritized, which is SDG number 17 on partnerships for sustainable development, because we believe that to realize all of these different sustainable development goals, we cannot do it alone as Port Authority, because our control on the terminals or on the industrial sites is rather limited, and therefore we have deployed a lot of different partnerships with the different port users to make sure that we can in fact make our port one of the most sustainable in the world. Next slide, please. How did we set up this policy? First, in 2018, this was, we had a survey in our port authority or in our full port platform to define what sustainability means for us as a port. And we have encapsulated this in a corporate social responsibility statement, so that we all know what sustainability means for us. So it's linked to our DNA. We have also set ambitions for 2030. And as I said before, the 5 SDGs that we have selected, for those SDGs, we have set ambitions that are a lot stronger than for the other ones. However, we have ambitions for all SDGs. And then as a third step, we have also set intermediate KPIs to make sure that we realize our ambitions, and we have a follow-up. And each 3 years, these KPIs are reviewed and updated and incorporated in the port strategic plan, which is very much linked to our sustainability policy. To create all of this, we have had workshops with more than 100 employees of the Port Authority of all different ranks and different genders, to make sure that we have a lot of bottom-up support for our sustainability policy. And at the same time, after each round, we went for feedback and approval by the leadership team. So we also had a top-down approach. Next slide, please. So next, I will have the questions at the end, so you can put the next slide, where I will explain more about how we set this policy up with all the people in the port. And this is explained via this visual here. In Port of Antwerp, we try to take up an active key role as community builder. What does this mean? There are 3 classic roles for port authorities in the world. Most port authorities nowadays are adopting the model of being a landlord, so owner of the land. And in this role, you can take up your role also as a good father for making sure that your land has top-notch technology that is as sustainable as possible. You also have a role as regulator. In the concession contracts you write, you can set certain rules to make sure, important for the sustainable development, to make sure that you have a balanced level playing field for all the actors in your port, so that they have the same rules to apply to or to adhere to, so that first movers don't have a disadvantage compared to the other ones. And then the third classic role is a role of operator. As Port Authority, we operate our bridges, our locks, our tugboats, and so on. And also there, we try to make sure that they are being operated in the most sustainable way. But with the arrival of our new CEO in 2016, he did a survey in the Antwerp Port platform, asked to all the companies in the port, what do you expect from us as Port Authority? And there we identified a 4th role, a role that we called community builder, which means that they asked us to try to find the hidden synergies within our port platform, so maybe possible partnerships that were there, where the different companies in the port could support each other and strengthen each other. And it was our role. They asked from us as Port Authority to take up the role of community builder to facilitate these partnerships. And this is, of course, very well linked to SDG number 17 on partnerships for the goals. Next slide, please. So about these partnerships, and this is the third and for me most fundamental part of the presentation. At the Antwerp Port, we as Port Authority team up with business frontrunners to implement our business plan for sustainable growth and transition, because as said before, we cannot do this alone. And we have identified several important enablers for a successful partnership. It's important to partner up with the business frontrunners, try to identify the companies that already have a sustainability policy and also want to go for sustainable development. Transparency and trust is very important, and therefore we think it's key that you as a port authority take up a role as facilitator, because sometimes between the companies in your port they might be competitors and not willing to work with each other unless there is a neutral facilitator like a port authority to build transparency and trust. We always use a project-based approach. We try to have different stakeholders and expertise within each project to have the different partners in the value chain present. We think it's important to set a right policy framework as a port authority, but also do some lobbying with the government to make sure that the policy framework from the government is matching the expectations from our port users. Last but not least, we also help our companies in the port with funding opportunities to find funds, for example, from the European Union, funds that are available for sustainable projects and where we can help them write their funding applications. Next slide, please. Now I would like to present you some showcase projects. We have a balanced portfolio of them. They are situated under 3 pillars, being sustainable energy, sustainable industry, and sustainable shipping. 3 pillars that identify the projects with which we want to realize our sustainability policy. Next slide, please. So the 9 projects that we have identified. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. The 9 projects are situated under the 3 pillars, and as you will see, they are mostly related to the energy transition, because this is one subject where ports can have a crucial role, according to us, definitely in Antwerp, having the chemical cluster here. For sustainable energy, we already have a huge onshore wind park, the biggest of Belgium, and we are expanding its capacity day by day. We try to have pipelines, backbones as a new or a more preferred mode of transport to transport sustainable flows like hydrogen, CO2, that's more type of waste, also waste heat and steam, so that we can have less trucks on the road. The heat network is also one of our most impressive projects, where we have waste heat from the companies in the port, which we transport via pipelines to the city of Antwerp, where it can be used in the municipalities. The Hydrogen Import Coalition is a project that is very much in the news the last months, where we are trying to set up a value chain from countries with high renewable energy potential, like for instance Brazil, where they can create green hydrogen with the renewable energy that they can source there, and where we can set up a value chain to transport the green hydrogen via export terminals, via vessels, and import terminals, via pipelines all the way to the Antwerp chemical cluster. And we have a coalition here with shipping companies, with industrial companies, with exporting and importing companies, and setting up memorandum of understandings with countries to export green hydrogen. The sustainable industry pillar, there we have Next Gen Districts, which is a hotspot in the Antwerp port area for circular economy, where we are attracting companies only focused on circular economy. Antwerp at Sea project, very important for our emission reduction. It's a project where we have a network to capture, transport, and store carbon, CO2 from the companies in the port area under empty gas fields in the North Sea, which is adjacent to the countries of Belgium and the Netherlands. The Power to Methanol project this is an example of where we also can use the CO2 that was captured to produce green methanol. And then the third pillar on sustainable shipping, we try to be a multi-fuel port to have an alternative of fuels on offer, for example, green methanol, ammonia, or hydrogen. We invest heavily in onshore power supply technology so that the vessels at the berth in our port can use the electricity from onshore and avoid using their auxiliary engines and avoid the emissions that come along. And last but not least, the tugboats that we use as Port Authority, they are operating more and more on hydrogen and methanol. Next slide, please. To end, I would like to give you a small showcase on what we as Port of Antwerp Bruges International can do. Because, well, before I worked on several hydrogen projects for the Port of Antwerp Bruges Authority. We also have Port of Antwerp Bruges International, which takes care of port development projects worldwide, more on a consultancy basis. And there we try to work with ports in an integrated partnership where we can do the port management with structural on-site support of our port professionals. We can do consulting services where we don't only do analysis, but we also go on location to do the implementation as well. We have a sister company called APAC, which is the Antwerp Flanders Port Training Center, to have training programs where we can have tailor-made training programs for the ports we work with. And sometimes we also do an investment to show that we are working on a strategic partnership with a given port. Next slide, please. What can we do in terms of sustainability development or consultancy on sustainable development? We have worked a lot with Porto do Aço, which Santos, of course, knows very well. Also in Brazil, we have a partnership with Porto do Aço, and we have helped them to set out their sustainability policy, which you can see on the visual here. Next slide, please. And apart from setting up the sustainability policy for them, to work with them and support on setting up the sustainability policy, we have also given consultancy services on a variety of other topics within their sustainability policy, like onshore power supply, like offshore winds, like KPIs for the sustainability policy, the report that they wrote, a climate adaptation plan, biomass and forestry market study, the ESG goals and targets. We have helped to build a portfolio management tool, and we have assessed the projects on sustainability from Port of Antwerp, whether they can also be implemented in ASU. Next slide, please. And if I'm correct, this kind of sums up in a nutshell, the sustainability policy of Port of Antwerp Bruges as an authority. This was rather fast, given the time that I was giving. But if you have any questions, I'm very happy to answer them. And you can also see my email address on the slide. So if you want to get in touch with me to discuss further opportunities to work together, I am happy to get in touch with you. Thank you.
Obrigado, Joaquim, pela excelente apresentação e por
Thank you,
compartilhar.
Joaquim, for your excellent presentation and sharing with us this wonderful experience and the full adherence to the SDGs. We have now some questions, and we'll have two questions, Joaquim. The first is from Letícia Malveschi. What were the main positive changes when you adopted this policy for sustainability at the Antwerp port?
The most important accomplishment of having this sustainability policy is actually that we have a stronger license to operate now, because you can imagine in terms of global disruptions like climate change, the public opinion on the Antwerp port was turning bad, because it was hard to call the port very sustainable. But when setting out the sustainability policy, we put a lot of attention to this, and actually it was rewarded by the Belgian Federal Institute of Sustainable Development as being the best sustainability policy of the year 2020. And we saw that public opinion certainly shifted. The Antwerp port was suddenly not only the problem, or not the problem anymore, but we could also be part of the solution as a port authority, having a lot of impact on the way that our companies move forward and hopefully towards sustainable development.
Obrigado, Joaquim. Uma segunda pergunta.
Thank you, Joaquim. Now, a question from Leonardo de Souza Cruz concerning operating costs and infrastructural costs. Is it more expensive to keep a sustainable port, or is it an investment that will have a future payback?
There we are very strong believers that it's an investment that will have a future payback. Let me give you the example of onshore power supply. In fact, why is onshore power supply now a topic? This is all related to nitrogen emissions, and nitrogen emissions used to be regarded as not such a big problem, but suddenly in society, people got more aware of the negative health effects of onshore power supply. We as Port Authority have adopted this very soon in our sustainability policy, and yes, it comes with very big investments in onshore power supply, which we are already doing now. Inland navigation can already use onshore power supply in the Port of Antwerp, and the seagoing navigation in the upcoming years as well. And very recently, I don't know if it's been made public yet, but from inside information, we know that the European Union will make the use of onshore power supply obligatory by, I think it was 2028, for the major European ports. So by adopting sustainability practices already early on, we now have an advantage, because we are almost already ready and having done the investments earlier on, so that the big shipping lines are sure that they are still welcome in Antwerp if they want to keep operating by using onshore power supply. So we actually have an advantage there, because we invested early on.
Ótimo.
Muito bom, Joaquim. Uma
Very, very good.
última pergunta.
A last question, Joaquim, and trying to link with the next presentation. What the Antwerp Airport is doing to the resilience of the port infrastructure. We have Mr. Gerardo that will make a presentation on behalf of Bianca about the infrastructure resilience. Is the Antwerp Airport doing something about it?
Yes and no. If I'm correct, you are referring to resilience to later effects on climate change. So let's say climate adaptation, and make sure that our infrastructure is resilient. In fact, we have done some studies on this, and the studies show that in the next decades, effects of climate change on our infrastructure will still be moderate, will still be rather small compared to ports in other sides of the world because of our geographical location and being a river port. A river port that already has to work with the tides. So we already have a 6-meter tidal difference. So we are used to this. Our infrastructure is already adapted to this. We don't expect in the upcoming decades, based on the study that we have done, that we will have to do major adjustments to our infrastructure. This was done a study by the Port Authority, but also the terminals itself do their own studies, and most of them show that the infrastructure should be resilient for the upcoming decades.
Legal, legal.
Wow, that's good. Good to hear.
Exactly.
One more question from Adilson Luiz Gonçalves. How long does it take for the environmental licensing for the ports in Belgium? What is the duration of the licensing?
I cannot give one answer to this. Of course, very much depending on the project. Usually for the smaller projects, the licensing only takes a couple of months. It can be done within 6 months. But we also have a major new factory being built in the Antwerp port now by Ineos. It's the biggest investment in the chemical industry in more than 20 years in the European chemical industry. So it's a major investment, but here the environmental licensing is taking a couple of years because it's such a huge project. Yeah, don't know if this answers your question. But we as Antwerp Port Authority, for the environmental projects, for the bigger major projects in our port, we also support this. So the procedure goes faster with the governing authorities from the Flemish and Belgian government.
Sim, sim, respondeu sim.
Yes, yes. Thank you. Another question from Vader Braga. How do you do the dragging activities in the Antwerp Airport? Can you talk about the dragging activity?
Dredging, so we have the 2 types of dredging. Well, 3 types actually. Within the maintenance dredging, so just maintaining the required draft. We have the dredging on the river Scheldt itself, so on the river, and this is actually a responsibility of the Flemish government. So the Port Authority doesn't really interfere with this because it's a governmental responsibility, and they source it out to Deme and Jan de Nul, the 2 famous Belgian dredging companies. For behind the locks, so in the docks behind the locks, it's the Antwerp Port Authority being responsible. But since there is no tidal difference there, the dredging is not too much. And then the dredging for new projects, for example, was yesterday in the news, the deepening of the Europa terminal in Antwerp, which is the oldest and one of the biggest tidal terminals that we have in Antwerp. For this deepening, yeah, this is in the scope of a project of several years. We also contract DEME on the Null usually to take care of the dredging works that are needed for the deepening and the repositioning of this terminal. One more thing on dredging. Most volume of the dredged effluent that we have is being treated in the Antwerp port itself by Amoras. This is a site where dredged material can be treated, and the water and the sand can be separated again, so that the clean water can then be sent back to the river. I hope this answers your question.
Respondeu sim.
Yes, you did. We have one more question for you, Joaquim, from Mr. Sidney Bibiano. He says the port doesn't work with sustainability, and this is really harming the artisanal fishery for the fishers in our region. I don't know if in Antwerp you have a strong fishing sector close to the port. If you do have it, I'd like you to comment a little bit about this relationship with fishermen communities, and please tell us about this relationship and solutions you might have found. If you do not have a fisherman community, with the community in general, how's the relationship you have?
So indeed, in Antwerp, the fishing community is almost non-existing, being a river port. In Zeebrugge, there is a bit, but also not too much. In terms of the fish themselves, as some sort of biodiversity protection program for the species. So we have a species program for all the species in the port itself, and specifically for the fish, we have made difficult to say in English, but we have made a connection from the river via a small tube to a specific pond that is located right next to the river, where the fish can lay their eggs freely, where they are not disturbed. This is from a perspective from biodiversity, to make sure that the specific species of the fish in our river are preserved. But also here, fishery is not allowed. So this is nothing to do with fishery, but more from a biodiversity perspective. About the communities in the port itself, the people living in the port or next to the port, there we have had major issues in the past by port expansion projects, which would mean that a certain small village would have to be relocated. This has been a big legal issue in the early 2000s, where by law it was decided that the village that would have to be removed for building the new dock could stay. And this was rather a bad experience, I can say, for the Antwerp Port Authority, but we learned a lot from this. So now we have actually a recurring meeting with NGOs and with the communities each couple of weeks, where we literally sit together around the table with them to discuss future development plans of the port, to show them in advance, because we believe it's better to take their concerns from the early beginning, so that their concerns can be included in our plans, to avoid that certain development plans get blocked in a later phase of the project when the investment has already been made.
Perfeito, Joaquim.
Perfect, Joaquim. Thank you very much for your answer. I
You're welcome.
only have two more questions for you, because we are almost out of time. The
Yes.
next question is from Mr. Thiago Souza. How is the engagement relationship between the high leadership of Antwerp Port with sustainability issues? And he thanks you for your excellent presentation.
Thank you. You're welcome. The leadership team, especially the CEO, is very much aware of the importance of our sustainability policy. We also have a dedicated sustainability or CSR manager for the corporate social responsibility, and we also have created a couple of years ago a full new department called Sustainable Transition, where more from a policy perspective, long-term projects get initiated that then will be developed in the port area with the companies in the port. So the leadership team, they are also very much involved with these, what we call sustainable projects, belonging to the sustainability department, to do follow-up. So all of the directors are linked to one or a couple of these projects. So they are very much aware of it and they very much support it. Also, our CEO, Jacques van der Meijere, is the chairman of The Shift. The Shift is an organization in Belgium, sort of an alliance of different front-runners for front-running companies for sustainable development. And since our CEO is also the chairman of this, he is very much aware of what's moving in the landscape of sustainable development in Belgium. And we can learn from other companies as well. So I must say it's very, very much supported by our leadership team.
Ótimo saber, ótimo saber.
It's excellent to know. Great. The importance, Joaquin, of the high leadership with regard to all issues related to sustainability. We have a last question for you. Actually, it's not really a question.
Pela parte que você falou da
I
limpeza.
felt very interested about the part when you commented about the removal of plastics from the river. I would like you to tell us a bit more about how this happens, the type of mechanism which is used.
I will try to explain. It's of course easier when I can show you a picture, but we have several devices for fighting the plastic pollution. And maybe on top of those devices, maybe first I should say we also have a zero plastic pollution charter, a document, an agreement that has been signed by some of the major chemical plastic companies in the port, where they engage together to find solutions to fight the plastic problem in the River Scheldt. That's from a policy perspective. And then we also have 3 devices to fight plastic pollution. One of them you saw is the plastic catcher, the container that can be deployed somewhere in the River Scheldt or in the docks where there is a certain stream of water where the plastics are being taken. So we put the container on a strategic location so that it can trap as much as plastic as possible. We also have a device, it's called the Condor. It's more like a sort of mechanical machine with a big shovel that's floating on the water, where it can literally just go around the docks and take as much as plastic out from the water, and again put it in a container which is also floating on the water. And the third device we have, it's called the Nuloplastic. It's like a huge vacuum cleaner that can be used to clean the shores around the River Scheldt from all the small plastic particles that would have been escaped from the chemical industry. And then on top of that, each year we have a monthly campaign, usually in the month of September, where employees of the Port of Antwerp literally take a garbage bag and a device to go and search and pick up plastic from the port. It's sort of an awareness campaign as well, to avoid plastic pollution in our port.
Perfeito, Joaquim. A gente tem mais.
Perfect, Joaquin. We have a few more questions for you, but I believe We are out of time, and we should, out of respect to the next speaker, Mr. Gerardo. So we thank you very much for your presentation and for your availability of time, Joaquin. Now
You're
I
welcome.
will give the floor to Leonardo. Thank you once again, Joaquin, for your availability, for your presentation. You answered all our questions. If anyone has other questions, you may send the questions directly to Joaquin. Now I'd like to
Exactly.
invite Clarissa, who is part of the professional type Young, for the introduction of our next speaker. Welcome, Clarissa. Thank you. On behalf of ANTAC and Bianca, I thank you for your invitation. We'd like to share the screen. I would like to give you a brief introduction of Bianca here in Brazil. We need to share the screen.
Bom, obrigada.
Thank you. I'd like to tell you briefly what Bianca is. It is a global structure for transportation. Our mission is to remain in the leadership as source of information globally in everything related to bird transportation in the 21st century. So we intend to supply technical guidance, trying to reunite the major international experts of the private and public sector in technical, economic, and environmental issues related to water transportation and its infrastructure. Bianca is a major technical community that meets every 4 years during global congresses, such as the COPEDEC and Bianca Global Congresses for developing countries. Every 2 years, we have the Bianca Smart Rivers Conference, and Bianca also supports young professionals in developing countries. That's where I'd like to show you. Next slide, please.
Pode passar, por favor. Bom, hoje no mundo, a Bianca ela tem 43 membros
Bianca has
qualificados em
43 qualified members worldwide.
sessões nacionais.
We have 27 national sessions. Here in Brazil, our qualified member is ANTAC. ANTAC represents us, and we also have 400 corporate members between ports, universities, public and private sector. I am here trying to share with you the initiative of young professionals from Bianca. This is a subgroup from the young professional. We created that in 2021 with the encouragement from ANTAC. Our goal is to help young Brazilian professionals to get involved in the activities from Bianca International. So our main goal is connecting professionals from the port and sea sector in Brazil, and we intend to share technical knowledge and best practices that are promoted from Bianca International. We have 33 active members in Brazil. If you are interested in being part of our group in Brazil, please send us an email. We will love to receive your email. You can get in touch with Alexandre, who is our representative at ANTAC. He's the management of the group in Brazil. Now I'd like to give the floor to Dr. Geraldo Bessoni. He's the delegate from Bianca. He is from Argentina, and he will present a study which talks about the uncertainties related to climate changes and the structure of resilient navigation. Mr. Bessoni, you have the floor.
Clarissa, for that presentation. Yes, I am the current delegate from Argentina to MBCOM, and also since last year I've been also a member of the PTGCC, which is the Permanent Task Group on Climate Change. I don't know you, but I'm not seeing the presentation. Is there? Oh, there it is. Thank you. Next slide, please. Well, the Piang presentation was already done by Clarissa before me. Just I wanted to add to her presentation that we work with different commissions, which itself take in different aspects of the infrastructure. For instance, MARCOM, which has to do with all maritime navigation and ports. INCOM, which is for inland navigation. MBCOM, the one I'm currently with, which has to do with the environmental aspects of navigation, and RECCOM, which has to do with recreational navigation. So these commissions, they produce different regulations and works that allow the professionals around the world to get a notion of a specific themes. Please, can you put the next one? Next slide, please. Yes, that's it. I was saying also that I belong to PTGCC. PTGCC is quite new. It's, as I said, a permanent task group on climate change, which is a cross commission which takes part in all of the other commissions, dealing with mainly what has to do with climate change issues. Also, in this commission, there's also partners from outside Piang. There's at least mainly European partners which collaborate with us in the presentation of new work. The next one, please. As I've said, the Piang main goal is to produce publications to be used as a reference for experts worldwide. If we take a look at the ones directly concerned with climate change in the past few years, we got work group 178, which is the guidance to climate change adaptation. Work group 188, which has to do with carbon management in navigation. Work group 193, resilient maritime and inland waterborne transportation. And the one I'm going to refer to today is the first technical note produced by the PTGCC, which is has to do with managing climate change uncertainties. Next one, please. What are the objectives of this technical note? Well, first of all, it's devised to get to owners, designers, and financiers of infrastructure to let them reduce the risk related to climate change. When we look at this, with what we try to put forward is the scenario referred to climate change, also reducing the reliance in past data to predict the future events. We're going to look at this further on. To consider unlikely but plausible scenarios when you're going to make a long-term or a big investment. Preparing for the unprecedented, well, that is to say, occurrences that haven't yet been seen, and the possibility of more than one scenario to occur jointly, and the cascading failure in infrastructure due to them. Also, the idea of adopting adaptive and flexible solutions measures. The need to use of the monitoring and the gathering of data in order to take an informed decision making. Also, when we evaluate a project, we must recognize the idea of accommodation to these uncertainties. Next one, please. Well, we were talking about uncertainties. Well, what are the uncertainties? First of all, I think it is worldwide already the notion that climate change is occurring. The questions are how quickly this climate change is going to take place. What are the magnitude of the changes that are going to be seen, and when and how often the critical thresholds will be crossed throughout the development. Also, although there are already many measures being taken in order to reduce the greenhouse and the gas emissions, well, what are going to be their actual impact on climate change? Will it be done globally, and when will these measures actually be delivered? Also, another uncertainty is what will happen regarding socioeconomic and environmental changes that might take place in the systems, and what to be done in the meantime. Also, of course, all these studies are performed using models that simulate the changes. Them itself present sources for uncertainty, taking into account that we try to model very complex and interacting processes. Next one, please. To show you the spread of these uncertainty, here is a very interesting slide which has to do with what's been done by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change as what is expected to be the global surface temperature change in the upcoming years. As you can see, of course, the further we go in the future, the larger the uncertainties are. And this in itself has to do with the possibility of knowing beforehand what will actually take place. Please, next one. Climate-related impacts, how do they affect infrastructure? As I said before, well, there's already been several publications which treat these happening. For instance, in this slide, we see all the process of the navigation and intermodal transport, and how in each of the phases the climate parameters that could change will have a different kind of impact in each. Of course, if someone is interested, I would refer them directly to this work group publication for further reading. Next one, please. We were talking before about using scenarios. Well, the idea behind them is that the conventional way of doing the designing, we used statistical methods, mainly projections of past events. We were looking at the great uncertainty in the upcoming years, especially beyond the threshold of 2050, then it turns out that these past events start to lose the certainty, and so they become increasingly less accurate to actually being able to design the infrastructure, taking into account the lifespan of the intended construction. Also, when we start to test an operational asset, one will have to start to do some sensitivity testing in order to see all the possible future climate, to avoid doing the maladaptation or the structure not to be prepared for some of the possible future events. Also, this scenario selection must be in line with the amount of exposure or vulnerability that the new operation or structure will be subject to. In this case, the more susceptible to weather and climate-related damage or disruption, the more magnitude the investment of the future operation or structure will be, then the more the quantity of investment or the range of scenario must look into. Next one, please. When we look to what kind of scenario must be looked into, then Piank has put forward some recommendation and take into account especially the design operational life of the structure. If the structure is going to be less than 10 years, or you've already got recent and available data that already takes into account the changes that are already being presented, then you may not need to actually do many or any scenario at all. If you turn to a midlife of more than 10 years, but less than 30, then it's recommended that a few, at least, climate scenarios and sensitivity tests should be carried out in order to combine them and have a projection of what might be needed. And if the idea of a structure is beyond 2050, and taking into account this idea of great uncertainty, as I showed prior on the surface temperature possibilities, then the recommendation is that a whole set of possible future climate scenarios should be looked into, and also perhaps also what is called unprecedented conditions that might be of occurrence. Next one. Well, here we've got the possible relative sea level changes in the Port of Boston area done by the NOAA. There you can see several estimations from very low to extreme changes in the water levels. So, and with the bars there, the yellow bars, different scenarios that could be tested in order to get a full notion of what might be expected, from the very plausible, which is 0.5, to the least possible, which is around 3 meters. This is the type of idea behind testing and also the sensibility to each of these new scenarios. Next one, please. And another idea is that should be taken into consideration is the flexible and adaptive design of the structures. That is to say, not because of the great uncertainty, it is not set the necessary to stand or withstand the extreme. Now, the way to go would be especially to strengthen both the engineered and the operational resilience of a structure. That is to say, the capacity to withstand and especially to be able to reconstruct afterwards in order to absorb the disturbance and being back operationally as quickly as possible. Also, another way to go is start to thinking not only on structural measures, but also in another, which could be mapping or zoning contingency and planning threshold for action, and especially the early warning systems and the adaptation capacity of the whole system. Please, next one. Sorry, next slide. Oh, there it is. Well, here again, this is a table which can be found in workgroup 178. Actually, well, naming possible physical measures which have to do with the structures, the system, the technologies, and the service we have to do with navigation. Also, social measures, that is to say, operation, information, and also behavior against possible occurrences. Also, institutional measures we have to do with the governance and the regulatory and policies to be taken into account in order to, as I said, cope with the adaptation. Please, next one. There it is. And one of the ideas proposed is that the structures or the operations that could fail be designed to fail as it says there, gracefully. That is to say, without being catastrophic. And that the measures that actually take place will be to manage the consequences of those failures. Here we have an example of failure. This is the Lucinda bulk sugar terminal in Australia, which was struck with a tropical cyclone back in 2011. Because of that occurrence, the deck of the wharf, the repairs were made is instead of doing the same kind of structure, the decks themselves were designed to be able to fail before the fastening to the structure. In that way, the deck will give way first, and the structure will be intact. And it's much easier to change a deck than to have to reconstruct the whole of the structure. Next one, please. We also mentioned about managing the consequences. That is to say, we know that certain events will take place. Then what can we do in order to be able to, as I said, manage the best way possible? For instance, in a flooding area, one idea would be obviously to raise the critical assets inside the risk area. Another is to create or nominate certain flood storage areas where they serve as a reservoir in order to be sacrificed in this inundation and protect the rest of the more important structures. And also, well, another measure would be to proofing the infrastructure itself against flood. That is to say that key installation, like say electricity or communications, have to be well placed in order to receive less possibility of damage when the inundation takes place. Please, next one. Also, well, while designing, you have to take into account that the possibility of joint occurrences of risk, that is to say, for instance, greater storms with the possibility of overtopping, also combined with heavy rainfall, and so these type of occurrences might trigger what are called cascading failures, which has to do with not only the structure itself, but perhaps inland structures or services. So this has to be also acknowledged and taken into account while one designs infrastructure. Another idea, well, here we see the Klimadeich in Germany, in Schleswig-Holstein, in North Germany, that already was designed in order to be able to be enhanced later on as the possibility of the sea level rise starts to create the need to have higher defenses. That is to say, these stages are already planned from the start, and they are not built, but they surely are prepared to do afterwards the building as it becomes increasingly necessary due to the changes in water levels. This principle can be also applied to several types of structure, for instance, breakwaters, a quay wall, and all general port facilities. Next one, please. Also, another flexible design idea is to identify the adaptation pathway. That is to say, what measures can be foreseen in order to reduce the effects. They have to be not taken into consideration from the start. That is to say, as meant, this is a pathway that surely will start to take place as is needed. Next one, please. In all of this presentation, we talked about uncertainties, we talked about adaptation, we talked about measures. All of that is not possible if we don't have the correct data. That is, we must understand, that is to say, the port authorities or whoever's in charge, the necessity of gathering data And that is to say, for instance, local hydrometeorological or oceanographic data will allow us to map the trends of this change in order to be prepared when certain thresholds are crossed, to take the optimal measures. Also, it is necessary to be able to know the condition and the performance of the assets. That is to say, when would a response be needed in order to cope with a certain event. Also, it becomes adamant to take the data from post-event occurrences in order to validate what we've thought of or we're expecting, in order to be able to predict in a better way what might be the future occurrences. Also, the costs and consequences of the damage that is and the downtimes that are experienced should be well documented, because they will play a key role in the informed assessment of future adaptation and also of future structure. Another, as always, it is very important also to know what's been done elsewhere and how it's worked out. That is to say, what has been done in order to adapt a structure, and what were actually the performance of that actions, and if it could be made possible to extrapolate those experiences to the one is referring to. And well, this is that should be done all the time. This monitoring the proportion of fit to purpose measures. That is to say, as I said before, the idea of the change, how is taking place, when and where. Next one, please. And here is, well, another key role is the appropriate evaluation methods when we start to plan ahead. That is to say, we must understand what are the costs implied in not doing anything. That is to say, what will happen if no action is actually done. And with that, also exposing the benefits of actually taking certain measures, although costly, in order to improve resilience. That should be also put into the evaluation methods when you start a new project. That is to say, one must start taking into account climate change into the equation that uses for assessing the costs of a future project. That is to say, as I mentioned before, with the past data, the past method of a conventional cost-benefit assessment should be reviewed in order to accommodate the complexities that are portrayed by the climate change, and this should be taken into account in a very early stage on. Also, of course, there are very difficult things to quantify, like social and environmental impacts that could happen because of a failure of a determined structure. That should also be taken into account. And as I said before, we must plot adaptation pathways in order to go to what's called adaptive management, or the idea of changing along the lifespan of an asset or a structure. Next one, please. Well, and to summarize a bit, the idea behind the technical note is to deliver these few key messages for developers and colleagues. Is first of all to understand the climate changes and uncertainty. That is to say that we must break from the conventional statistical methods or based on historic data solely to predict the magnitude of low occurrences events. And also the idea of selecting and applying different climate change scenarios, taking into account obviously the uncertainties also that are that I mentioned about quantifying these scenarios. Also the necessity of seeking solutions that are adaptive. That is to say that they could be modified throughout the lifespan in order to better adapt to these new changing possibilities. Also, when we do the evaluation of options, climate change should be considered as one of the key roles and taking into account. And last, delivering the resilient solutions in order to better withstand possible occurrences in the future. Next one, please. Clarissa already mentioned Piank. I would like just to add briefly that being a member of Piank allows you to get a hold of a lot of publications, very specific in as I said, different type of themes, and that this technical note in particular is free to download. I would recommend you to do so, and of course I'm ready to evacuate any questions that are asked. Next one, please. Thank you.
Obrigado, Gerardo, pela excelente apresentação.
Thank you very much, Gerardo, for your excellent presentation and for sharing with us your notes on Piank. Now, let us answer the questions on the chat. This is the interpreter. Can you hear me? Thank you, Gerardo, for your brilliant and precise presentation. Congratulations for Piank's work. We have a first question here. Gerardo, can you hear the translation?
Sorry, I couldn't hear
Gerardo,
the question, please.
Can you hear? This is the translator.
Can you click in the little globe and to put the presentation in English, so the translator.
Okay, done.
Can you hear me? It's the translator.
Yes, I can hear
Wonderful.
you.
Okay,
Sorry.
they will repeat the question for you.
Thank you.
There is a question from Fabrizio Gandini. He would like to talk about the proposals from the port of Santos, Guarujá, and Cubatão. There are many cases that could be approached here in the region. Well, actually, this is not a question for the speaker. It is for us. We have been conducting an assessment study of the climate risks in the region in order to define adaptive measures. The study was made by ANTAC and GC, and the first part of this study has shown risks of the increase of the sea level, wind, the quantity of rain in the region that could really impact the operation and port infrastructure here at the Port of Santos. So we are now trying to finalize this study. We intend to present this study to the community shortly, so we can discuss what Gerardo has shown us today, adaptive solutions. Some issues were mentioned by Gerardo that have not been included in our study. I believe we can add in the future, for example, those scenarios of the lifespan of the infrastructure, 10, 30, 50 years. Certainly, we will be able to make all of that compatible so we can have a more resilient port here. We have a second question for you, Gerardo, which is connected to the study. This is a question from Leticia Malvestion. She would like to know how the climate studies and adaptation studies are conducted, and she'd like to know if you have partnerships with the scientific community, university, civil society. What have you seen when you were in contact with other ports for the production of the technical note from Piank?
Well, first of all, the idea behind this technical note was to make awareness. It's not just one case. The group has conducted in the past few years several there was a poll sent to many ports throughout the world. This was done in 2020 and 2021, which is specifically they asked if they already perceive the climate change effects. That is to say, the idea that things were beginning to change and how that has disrupted their operations. The poll gave us the feedback that in a certain percentage is already being seen throughout the world. Unfortunately, the responses were not from the whole world. It was mainly from Europe, America, and some parts of Asia. But that idea prompted the necessity of taking into account what some ports are already doing, which is these scenarios. It is not, at least to my knowledge, it is not being done in a very organized way. It's more like each port is beginning to take measures. That's why the idea of the technical note is to provide some type of guidance in order to do the best practice possible. To my knowledge, I don't know in the region if someone is actually, well, I heard that Santos is already going that way, which is very, very interesting. And surely we would like to afterwards to be in touch with the actual results of the studies conducted. But well, it is an issue that is beginning to be acknowledged and is beginning to be thought of. But as I said, the technical note is more an idea to provide a guide for future studies. I don't know if it's okay, the answer, if it's enough.
Foi perfeita a resposta, sim,
Yes,
Gerardo.
your answer was perfect, Gerardo. And the Port of Santos is available to receive you here so we can talk about the study we are conducting.
Pleased to hear.
We have one more question from the Professor Adilson Gonçalves here. He says the City Hall of Santos also conducted a study related to the adaptation to climate changes, and there is also a municipal commission studying adaptation measures. So maybe we could sit, City Hall, Port, and you, we could talk about adaptive measures. It would be great. We have
Well,
another question.
Sorry, just to quote, the idea of city and port being aligned in many of the measures is paramount. As I said during the presentation, the actions will have to be combined in order to make the whole structures and the whole services more resilient. And when you think of the idea of the measures that had to be taken, some of them, as I said also, are not structural, but more have to do with the regulations and governance. And in that particular thing, well, it is very important to be aligned between the municipal and the port authorities.
Perfeito, Gerardo. Essa eu acho que
Perfect, Gerard. I believe this will be the next stage. With the scientific community, the whole community, the city, and if possible, counting on the support from Pianca, we'd like to make these two studies compatible and do a regional study on climate changes, because we cannot talk about port or about city, we need to talk about all things together. So we need to make those studies compatible. And I'd like to invite Professor Adilson to be a part of this conversation. We have another question for you from Mr. Leonardo de Souza Cruz. Considering the high complexity of the challenges related to climate changes, the maritime space planning would be an interesting tool for the adaptations to climate changes. Do you believe it could be useful?
Certainly. I mean, as I said, today we are faced with multiple uncertainties, and so when looking into the future, we have to take into account all possibilities. I mean, that is to say, and all tools available. And again, I will very much stress the idea of data gathering, which I believe it is a problem in the region to actually get good data and long data sets in order to be able to, as I said, try to establish tendencies, which also will lead to preparing better models in order to predict what might happen. So yes, certainly, all type of tools that can be applied also will give a broader view of the problem and will allow the decision maker to have better tools to actually conduct an informed decision.
Perfeito, Gerardo.
Perfect. We have one last comment here. After that, we'll have our closing question. Mr. Matheus Giovannoni comments that here in the region, there is a regional plan to adapt to climate changes in Santos region. They have a more regional planning, involving other municipalities also, to study the possible climate changes. So it would be great to have a group meeting involving everyone. And I have a last question, which is more specific for you, Gerardo. With regard to the infrastructure, like navigation channels, access, berths, I'd like to know how other ports worldwide see the influence of climate change on their underwater structures and infrastructure, such as navigation channel, access, berth. How can they increase the resilience for this type of infrastructure?
Well, the 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 magnitude of the changes obviously will be an issue, and that is very very variable throughout the world. For instance, I can give a direct idea of what's happening at the port I work for, that we are planning, for instance, new berths, and we had to reconsider the height of the berth, because we started seeing, well, recurrences of events which were thought to be, 100 years or more. Just this year, we have the second largest recorded high water level, and also that made us start thinking that we had to adopt new measures and new heights for the structure. In breakwaters, I do believe that, as I showed in the German, the Klimadeich in the north of Germany, they already started planning ahead on what's going to be the next years. The same thing the Dutch have done in some of the polders. They started to reconsider the structures and to adapt them to what they think would be the future necessities. So measures, I don't want to be repetitive, but need not only be structural. Many things can be done beforehand in order to be well prepared, from contingency plans, for instance, which are just seeing what might happen if a failure occurs, and how to cope with it. We might not need to wait for this event to happen to take some measures, which, as I said, don't need to be actually changing structures, but more likely to know what to do if something happens. And I do believe that these committees you were mentioning before, this reunions between region, municipality, and port, in order to see what could happen with the climate change, is a very important first step. And surely many measures that are not structural will be gained by this communion between all the parties, all the stakeholders, in order to arrive to some measures. So in this case, I think that the easy way would be structural, but there are other options that are short at hand that should also be taken into consideration when adapting.
Perfeito, Gerardo. Obrigado pela sua apresentação, pelas suas respostas.
Perfect, Gerardo. Thank you for your presentation and your answers. Your presentation was brilliant, and this work that Bianchi is doing will be very useful to the port community here in Brazil.
I would like just to add, we are, well, as I said, I strongly recommend everybody to get hold of this paper. It's more informative than actually than scientific. The idea of the group was that just to inform, to get people awareness, and we're working already on a follow-up, a second paper, which has to do with the idea of the necessity of adaptation and the consequences of not doing so. It's making a case to adapt. That I do believe is the bottom line of all this.
Perfeito, Gerardo. Então, convido a todos aí a...
Perfect, Gerardo. I invite all of you to access Piank's website and read this technical note because this is very important for us. Now I give the floor to Leonardo. Thank you. So now we'd like to thank you for your presence in this webinar. And with this, we close one more event in this Ocean Literacy Dialogue event. And we will have much more dialogues during our event. Now I give the floor back to Bruno for his final considerations. I'd like to thank everybody. I'd like to thank UNESCO for this opportunity to discuss this relationship between the port and the ocean. It's obvious this relationship, but here, yesterday and today, bringing international experts in this area, we had this international experience to discuss these subjects internally. I'd like to thank the organization of this event, Professor Leonardo, who helped us in this segment of the event, and also to thank our supporters and our technical team, so Tiago, Fabrício, Letícia, Leo, Vision Colin, who actively participate and work to make this a reality. And I hope this is the first moment of many other moments that we will have in the future, discussing with the society, an open port, looking forward, looking outside, and including everybody to discuss together the port as a whole, the future of the port. This is very important. I knew I would forget someone. Chieta, please, thank you very much. You helped us a lot in this event. So that's it. And I think we are closing our webinar, and I thank you again for your availability. Gerardo and Joaquin, thank you very much. And more than that, for the information and the knowledge you shared with us. Thank you very much. See you soon.